So, one question that I get all the time is, what books do you recommend for beginning herbalists? And the truth is, I don't. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but stick with me here for a moment. I want you to go out and get a bunch of books like this. Now, these books won't do you any good unless you happen to live in my particular bioregion, which is Northeast Oregon, Blue Mountain Range, Eastern Oregon. What I want you to do as a beginning herbalist is to discover your own voice and your own relationship and your own impressions about the land that grows around you before you pick up on somebody else's impressions or agenda or ideas, including my own. And I know it sounds counterintuitive and it's not really good for for self-advertising, because I have written an herbal book and I am writing a free herbalism course and things like that. But I don't want you to do any of that until you've learned your own voice. So you can go out here and you can buy the books that I would recommend for your area, and there's nothing specific that's in the stack. I just grabbed a stack off of my shelf. If you ever come to my farm to be an apprentice when we're hopefully able to open back up this year, or open up for the first time where people can come here safely, you'll notice that most of the books on my shelf don't have anything to do with herbalism. What they have to do is with identifying plants, right? So I live in Northeast Oregon. I already said that. But a lot of you, when you think of Oregon, you think of like the West Coast. You think of Portland, Eugene. You think mossy, green, moist. But I live on the Northeast side, which is a completely different world for a lot of reasons. And one of those reasons is that we are in the high mountain desert. So I have a lot of books about dryland wildflower, sagebrush ponderosa, Washington's best wildflower hikes, although I can only use part of this book for the eastern side because I'm right by Washington. Sagebrush wildflowers, common plants of the inland Pacific Northwest. This is a really good one because it's from the Forest Service. Northwest weeds, wildflowers of Washington. So, I mean, the names of these books don't really matter, again, unless you live where I live. But the theme is my bioregion. The theme is all these pictures of plants that I can identify, and it doesn't tell me anything about their medicinal properties. I know, again, that seems weird because you're wanting to learn about herbalism, but the best way to learn about herbalism and to learn herbalism and to become an herbalist and to just take your healing back into your own hands and all these things, whatever reason that you want to become an herbalist or just learn more, is to get to know the plants that grow outside your door, regardless if they can help you or not. Right? So instead of opening up an herbal book, this is what people tend to do. They buy themselves a big old book about herbalism, right? From some well-known herbalist or otherwise. And they open up the page and they start just absorbing all this information. And a lot of it is about specific plants. Of course, it'd be weird to write a book about herbalism where we didn't talk about plants at all, right? But then you get in your mind, boy, I really need to find this hood sedge, right? But what if hood sedge doesn't grow around you? Right, so it's less accessible, but then you think to yourself, I have got to find this hood sedge. I don't even know if hood sedge is medicinal, so don't. It's just a random grass, it looks like. And you're like, I've got to find this. This is the one that I've got to find. And so you're out and about on the land. Maybe it does grow near you, maybe it doesn't, but you're going to get curious, right? You're going to go out and you're going to look maybe. Maybe you go out and look, and maybe you walk by 20, 30, 50, 60, 100 plants that do grow in your bioregion that are really great to make relationships with, that can help you in a lot of ways. Or worse, even worse, let's say there's a plant that grows in your area that can do the same thing that this hood sedge can do, but you are dead set on getting this hood sedge because that's what the herbalist you read said you have to use. And so instead of going out into the land and looking and making this relationship, you go online and buy some hood sedge. And then, bam, nothing else needs to be done. You go to the next chapter, you find, I can't even turn pages, you find the next plant that you've got to have. However, what changes, it's not really necessarily a change, but something, a different type of habit that's a good thing to get into is you're going to say, I'm going to walk outside my door today, even if you're in like an urban environment or in the city, and you're just going to get curious about a plant. Even if you can't harvest it, you're still going to find what's growing in your bioregion, right? And you're going to be like, wow, I found, oh wow, look, that is, let's see, spotted knapweed. Right? There's a picture of spotted knapweed. Doesn't tell you if it's medicinal or not, right? But you're like, I really want to know all about spotted knapweed, and I identified it through my book, a few other sources maybe, and then I went online and I read all about it, and I discovered that it's really poisonous, or that it can help with this and this and this, or it should be used sparingly. It's like, a poison is in the dose situation. And then you can decide if you want to build a relationship with that plant, and then you can get yourself a little journal. Should have grabbed my journal. Never prepared correctly for these high-end videos. And then you can write down where you found her at, what she's used for. Do this for like a year. Do this for an entire growing season. Do this your entire life of herbalism. And before you know it, you will know pretty much all the plants that grow in your area, like the ones that are easily discoverable, and you'll know what they can do for you. And then when you go and you pick up, let's say, some other herbalist book, whether it's mine or anybody else's, and you say, well, they're saying that this plant can do this, this, and this, but I also know from researching this plant that grows next to me and that this one isn't in my area, that the plant does the same thing. Right? And so instead of reaching out and not being local to your bioregion, which is also a lot of, and I won't sidetrack too much, there's also a lot of really interesting studies that say, in particular, if you've lived somewhere for your whole life, especially generational or indigenous or anything like that, if you are using the plants that grow near you, typically your body responds better than if you, like, I don't know, order some rare plant from India or from the Amazon or somewhere, even on the West Coast or East Coast, whichever side you live on. The plants that grow near you, you will likely have better response to. Your body will recognize more than, say, something that's from far away that none of your ancestors or anybody ever used in any way, right? And so that's just, a lot of people are like, what do you mean? I just want a book, I just want to jump in, but I'm asking you to, like, I don't know, jump outward. Jump outward outside of your door, in your bioregion, and just start finding all these books. And you're like, how do I find these? Well, first you Google, like, let's say you live in Wyoming, say, wildflowers of Wyoming, sagebrush of Wyoming, this, that of Wyoming, and start just finding these little, like, identification guides for the area you live in. And then you can get down to, like, the nitty gritty. You can say, like, eastern Wyoming, western Wyoming, northern, southern, and then you can even go down to a county level sometimes. And I probably, again, never prepared for these videos. I have a bunch of booklets from my agricultural extension office. Even if you live somewhere in a city, you probably have one somewhat nearby, at least for your state, and you can reach out to them. And typically what they do is they put together, usually it's only a book about this big, right? It's not super thick, but they make a list of all of the invasive weeds and plants that are problems for farmers. Right? And a lot of these can be poisonous and stuff like that. Again, these aren't for telling you the herbal properties of a plant, but what plants are around you. But a lot of invasive and noxious weeds and stuff are actually really medicinal and usable if they're not, poisonous and going to kill you. And it's a really good idea to have a book to find those, and not one that's for the whole United States, one that's specifically for your county. If you do live in a big city, you'll probably have to go a county or two over, and my husband's bringing wood in. County or two over for the, like, the agricultural extensional office that's near you. But if you live in a farming area, there is going to be a ton of information, because these farmers hate these weeds popping up in their fields, especially if they're doing, like, alfalfa and things like that, because the more weeds that are in their field, the less they get for, like, if your alfalfa is weedy or something like that, you can't charge as much for. But it also makes harvesting grains and things like that a complication. But these books are really, really handy. These guides are really handy for learning what invasive weeds are growing around you. And realistically, unless you are somewhere that's relatively, I don't want to say pristine, but more remote, you're going to see more of these invasive plants than you are of the native ones. Even if the native ones are there too, you're going to see the invasive ones by proxy, because they're invasive. It's what they do. They cover more area. Like, I have a lot of native plants still here on my property, but if we ever go on a plant walk together, the first thing you're going to learn are all of these invasive plants that, like, outnumber the natives. And to be an ethical harvester, right? We always talk about not over harvesting, right? Like, it's really important to not over harvest, but there's nuances there. It's important to not over harvest native plant species that maybe have pressure upon them from either over harvesting or other invasive species moving in. And it's important to over harvest the hell out of invasive plants, right? And so that's a really handy thing you can do. You can say, well, this book talks about all the native plants in my bioregion, and this book talks about all of the invasive plants in my bioregion. And I know that a plant from this book sounds like it would really help me, but it also seems like it might be slightly over harvested, or it's kind of elusive in the wild, or it's really important to a particular type of, let's say, like wildlife, or like even the indigenous tribes in your area. You need to find an alternative option, right? Well, what if a plant from your little invasive guide has a lot of the same similar properties and can really do a lot of the same things, right? So you would opt to be ethical, there we go, and harvest that invasive plant over the native, slightly, should be hands-off plant. And a lot of that you really just aren't going to learn in anybody's herbalism book. And I know that it doesn't mean that eventually you can't go out and buy these herbalism books, but when we build this relationship first with our land and our area and the plants that are around us that are a problem or that need to be protected, right, we end up finding more of our own voice. So let's say instead of doing that, we did that first, and then we bought our first herbalism book, right? And we open up this book, and let's say this ballhead waterleaf, which is a type of geranium. I know that one. Let's say this ballhead waterleaf plant is like really something that we shouldn't be harvesting, but we haven't taken the time to get to know about our bioregion. But this book tells you that you should harvest it, right? And then you go out and you do it and you don't know any different maybe. But what if you took the time to like make a relationship with this plant because it's in your area or something similar, or you've kind of put your own ethics and your own understanding and your own feeling into place in your mind first, and you pick up this book and it says it doesn't really matter how much you harvest because blah 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 blah, and like let's say they have their own agenda behind it, and you better believe herbalists have agendas. Should I have an agenda? I have an agenda that pisses people off when I'm giving out free information, but it's just you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't know that unless you read this in the book. I mean, sorry, I got a notification that my phone is dying, even though the battery was almost all the way charged. So I'm like, oh no. So basically what I'm trying to say is I want you to build your own relationship and your own voice and your own sense of what's right and wrong before you allow somebody else to put that in your head. Right, because if not, you pick up their beliefs and their mindset and their relationship, and then you're kind of more malleable. You're not like, hey, that goes over what feels comfortable to me, and that's not what I've experienced. That bit about what I've experienced, not like just as me, but like the whole collective as I've, is really important to having your own voice too, because there's a lot of times where like young herbalists, regardless of your age, I just mean young in the field, get out there with a book in their hand, and they don't really get to make their own voice. Right, they don't get to trust their own experience because they've read something else in somebody else's herbalist book that tells them what they are not allowed to do, which may or may not be correct, or it doesn't allow for nuances to where you live, right? So that's my question of what herbal books should I buy. And then what they should be is all of the plant identification books of your unique bioregion. Go outside, identify a plant, learn about her. You can also at the end where you're like, wow, it's been a year and I've been identifying these plants, and I find myself coming back to this one person's blog or these resources really often, and I find myself resonating with that person. Then you can buy that book, right? Instead of just buying a book and then that's your Bible. Right? I don't want you to do that. I want you to be like, wow, and now I know all these plants. And guess what? When you're making your own like journal about what plants can do what in your area, it can just be a 97-cent, school binder that you write in, and then over the years, you'll end up with your own herbalism book, and you can add to it, expand it, learn from it, go back through and be like, wow, now I know this much more, and just keep adding in. And then you're like, what herbalism book do I need to buy? What herbalism book do I wish my kids or my grandkids or anybody else who's close to me down the line in the generation could have, how about the book that I've created for our region of where we live and the things that work for our family? And that's powerful. And that's taking a relationship with the land back into your own hands. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the most important message that I have for you is that you're absolutely smart enough to do this. And this is a big one. This is a big one where you really need to trust that you're smart enough to do this, right? You can get out there and you can identify these plants and you can build relationships with the plants that are around you. And I want you to know you really, 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 really are smart enough to do this. I know I've already said that, but I really need to encourage you in this step, because this one takes more trust in yourself, right? And like believing yourself and like really building that self-confidence, but it's key. It's key to you having independence over your own health and your own path in herbalism. And I just really, really want you to get out there and do this, because it'll make a big difference in your life and your mental health and everything. Start developing a relationship with your land. Reconnect in these efforts. Even if you live somewhere urban, just get out there and see what's going on. So if you like my random videos, my all over the place jabbering and this and this and that, and my beautiful like aesthetic backgrounds of like a professional YouTube video maker or whatever, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, turn on notifications, and share. Sharing is really important because it helps other people realize that they're smart enough to do this too. It's really surprising how many of us, well, it's probably not surprising. We really need to hear this. It really helps us get out there and take our own health into our own hands. If you are watching me on YouTube, come find me on Instagram. If you're watching me on Instagram, come find me on YouTube. I share all kinds of really helpful information, and my goal is to make you realize that you are smart enough to do this. So it's the message I share over and over again. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.